What's cooking, guys? For Alligator here, and today I have something new. I've managed to join an online tournament hosted by the Oceanic Tournament Series, or OTS, hosted on limitless.com and played via Pokemon TCG Live. I played 6 rounds, but I only managed to record 4 of them, and I will be releasing this series in no particular order. This is my 3rd round matchup with a Pidgeot control deck, and I am bringing my Cynthia's Garchomp EX deck. You can see the deck list in my previous video, linked in the description, and you'll probably find it in a card above. But I made a minor change to that list compared to the one you'll see here, which is I added a Professor Suro scenario in place of one of my Super Rods. So let's get on to the game commentary. And in here, I am playing second. I managed to put a Gible onto the active zone with no other bench. My opponent took a mulligan and gave me an extra card thanks to that. My opponent is starting off strong with double Nest Ball, and he managed to pull out a Pidgey and a Fezandipiti EX off of that turn and passes to me. I'm starting out relatively terrible here as my hand doesn't really do anything. So for my turn, I just draw a card, a Fighting Energy, put it on my Gible, and put Cynthia's Power Weight onto it just to hopefully last me the rest of the game. I do have an ace in the hole with the Pokemon League headquarters, hopefully to slow down the Cornerstone Ogerpon, as it is a basic and it is affected by Pokemon League headquarters. So I just simply swing with Gible and decide to save the League headquarters for later. So for my opponent's turn, he starts off with a Crispin, puts a Psychic Energy and a Fighting Energy onto the Cornerstone Ogerpon, plays a Nest Ball, and pulls out a Latias EX. Now plays an Ultra Ball, and at this point I'm still relatively new to facing a Pidgeot control, so I'm not sure what he was going to draw. So here you see that he pulled out a Cleffa. With the Latias EX, he can probably switch out and swing with Grasping Draw to refresh his hand. For my turn, I draw a Rellor, another dead card in this hand, but luckily I had a Cynthia's Gabite in order to try and fill up my bench further. So I decide to use Champion's Call and pull out another Gible just so that I have another backup in case I do lose this Gabite. So I decide to put a Fighting Energy onto the backup Gible, and this is when I decide to play the Pokemon League headquarters, as it should slow down the Cornerstone Ogerpon's attack by costing my opponent another energy to swing with his basics. So I just attack with my Gabite and knock out the Cleffa, pulling a Cynthia's Gible from my prize zone and passing my turn. My opponent promotes his Latias EX, I think just so that he has a bit of mobility, just so that he can swap out Pokemon as needed. So he plays an Artazon now, knocking off my Pokemon League headquarters, which puts me into the danger zone. Luckily, I have Cynthia's Power Weight to increase my HP, so I'm not in risk of getting OTK'd at least on this turn. However, my opponent now plays a Boss's Orders and swaps out my Gabite for the Gible, which is in OTK range from the Cornerstone Ogerpon. So now my opponent plays another Ultra Ball, fetching a Pidgeotto to evolve his Pidgey, putting him closer into his Pidgeot control ability. Now he puts the final energy onto the Cornerstone Ogerpon, retreats the Latias EX, and promotes the Cornerstone, and demolishes for knockout on my Cynthia's Gible. I promote my Cynthia's Gabite in response to that. Luckily, I pulled a Cynthia's Gible in my prize spot previously, which would enable me to recover faster. And I also draw a Cynthia's Roselia off of my top deck. And with my opponent replacing my Pokemon League headquarters for an Artazon, I can manage to pull out another basic Pokemon onto my bench. Here you can see me think if I'm going to pull out another Roselia or another Gible, and ultimately decide to pull out a Gible. Thanks to Champion's Call, I can actually pull out a Garchomp and evolve the Gabite into the Garchomp, which actually bypasses the Ogerpon's ability. And now I decide to add another energy onto my Gabite. Hopefully it doesn't bite me, but I really want to knock out that Cornerstone Ogerpon in one hit. So doing so actually gives me 2 prizes, and hopefully I get another energy to be able to swing with Corkscrew Drive. And luckily I actually pull out 2 energies from my prize picks. My opponent decides to promote the Mimikyu, which I forgot that he placed in the previous turn. That Mimikyu actually is a pain because it is immune to my Garchomp as it is an EX thanks to its safeguard ability. Luckily, I set up 2 Cynthia's Gibles to evolve into a Gabite, which has the ability to deal with that Mimikyu, especially if I evolve the Roselia into a Roserade. So my opponent actually uses Flip the Script to draw 3 cards, and I think he managed to pull a Ultra Ball out of that and uses the Ultra Ball to fetch a Pidgeot and evolves his Pidgey into the Pidgeot. He also places an Ethan Sudowoodo onto the bench before he uses his Pidgeot's ability. So he takes a while to search his deck to find that perfect card that he might use to turn the situation around. So his only outs, from the way I can see it, is to try and knock out my basics from the bench. So I'm guessing he's either gonna get Counter Catcher or Boss's Orders. I don't really know what he got, but after he picks his choice, he decides to play a Crispin to fill out the energy for his Mimikyu. So now I'm just waiting for my opponent to decide on what to do, and he finally puts the second energy onto the Mimikyu and plays a Counter Catcher as expected, and he pulls one of my Gabites onto the active zone, instantly knocking it out with Mimikyu's attack. So I now promote my other Gible onto the active zone, knowing that I can evolve it into a Gabite. And my turn starts, and I actually draw the Professor's Turo scenario, and it might be relevant because he can see a Ethan Sudowoodo, which can retreat lock me. So the Professor's Turo scenario is actually to find our way out of that. So here I actually use Champion's Call and find the Cynthia's Roserade and evolve my Roselia, putting the Cynthia's Gabite's attack into lethal range. But before I attack, I actually use Artisan and pick out a Spiritomb from my deck into my bench. I then attach a single fighting energy onto the Gabite, knocking out the Mimikyu, taking a single prize in return. So for the prize, I actually pull out a TM Evo, which at this stage is useless. So my opponent actually pulls out an Ethan Sudowoodo, which, like I mentioned, with Professor Turo's scenario, would enable me to escape any retreat locks issues. But with the Gabite, if it survives, I can just evolve it into a Garchomp and try to win the game. So my opponent uses Flip the Script to draw 3 cards, plays an Arven to get a Super Rod and a Secret Box, and he now plays the Super Rod that he just got to refill his deck with his lost or dead Pokemon and energy. I didn't check which of the cards he got and put back into the deck, but I'm fairly confident that I didn't need to do that. I felt like I was actually in a commanding position, so as long as I don't get an Iono. But since he used the Arven, I'm in no fear of that. My opponent now uses a Night Stretcher to pull out a Psychic Energy after he actually used his A-Spec, the Heroescape, to increase the Mimikyu's HP to 170. So I think it was a smart move, as now he's not in any range to get one-shotted by my Gabite, and he decides to retreat his Sudowoodo for that Mimikyu, who could tank at least one hit at this point. So for my turn, I draw a Rabsca, another dead card, and I decide to use a Artisan to pull out another Roselia, as if I get another Roselia, I'd be able to one-shot that Mimikyu. So I use Champion's Call to get the Roserade in preparation for another swing for my next turn. I don't think my Gabite will die this turn anytime soon, so I put another energy onto my Garchomp just to prevent any potential EX threats that my opponent might pull out. So I just swing with Gabite and pass my turn. So my opponent draws his card, puts an energy onto the Sudowoodo, and plays a Boss's Orders, and smartly targets my Cynthia's Roserade onto the active zone. He then retreats the Mimikyu and swaps out with the Ethan Sudowoodo and swings with his Retreat Lock, which at this point I am now extremely happy that I actually put in Professor Turo's scenario onto my deck. This game would have gone very differently if I could not have been able to swap out my Roserade for anything else. So I decide to use the Artisan another time, pull out a Cynthia's Roselia, putting it on the bench. I then equip the Cynthia's Power Weight I drew this turn onto the backup Gabite, and use Champion's Call to get another Garchomp just to be prepared for any other shenanigans. I then finally use my Professor Turo scenario, which effectively retreats the Cynthia's Roserade. I then promote the Cynthia's Garchomp with the energy and swing with Corkscrew Drive for the knockout. This brings me to 1 prize remaining, and I managed to pull a Buddy Poffin off of my prize pick. It doesn't really give me anything at this stage, but you know, it's nice to see that you're in an advantageous position. So my opponent promotes his Pidgeot EX as his main attacker and uses his Fezandipiti's Flip the Script to draw 3 cards. So my opponent is thinking about what he's planning to do at this stage and uses his Quick Search ability to find that thing that might turn this situation around. Here you see me check my discard pile to see what I can do. I'm thinking that I might need something like an energy retrieval or a super rod at one point to try and just keep myself sustained with resources, but with 32 cards in the deck, that's not really that big of a problem at this stage. But knowing that I had 3 energies in the discard pile is a cause of concern, so I wanted to do some forward thinking and probably try to find a way to get an Arven for the energy retrieval or super rod. However, at this point, I think my opponent sees the writing on the wall and concedes and giving me the victory. If you've stayed up to this point, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. If you think you can tell me how to improve my content, please write down in the comments below so I can take note and improve my future content. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.